few more questions building up that I will address later. My name is Johan. I will be your host for the next 75 minutes. I'm a Microsoft MVP in setup and deployment, and I've been doing deployment the past 20 years or so now. It was easier back then. Copying 2 floppies, done. Now it's all imaging and user profiles and Windows, but we still have tools that can help us migrate things from older versions of Windows to newer version of Windows, and that's exactly where the user state migration tools come into play. So, we will dive into the different scenarios that USMT4 supports, talk about the features, talk about some tips and tricks that you may run into, and we also spend some time on integrating USMT together with the most or 2 most common deployment solutions from Microsoft, and then a little bit in the end on troubleshooting, what we can do when, things go wrong. Some point in time they will. So, when talking to customers, the question I would like them to ask themselves is not whether they should be using these tools or not, but rather, can they afford not to use them? Because if I have an XP machine over here, and I migrate that Windows over to a new Windows 7 machine, or I do a reinstallation, a refresh of the same machine, and data is lost in the process that was on the previous installation, even if it's not taken from your paycheck or from the end user's paycheck, it will still be a cost for the organization. And the tools that can help us migrate those settings and that data, they cost you nothing. It's license-wise free. So it all comes down to most companies, even if they have a policy that clearly says, users are not allowed to store data locally, well, guess what? Sometimes they do. Anyway, not on purpose, always, but sometimes because an application simply save the file local, or they by accident save it local, or you might have an application setting being stored local. And if you not carry that over, again, we are going to talk about a pretty big cost for the organization. So, what is USMT? Well, it's basically a command line version of the Windows Easy Transfer utility that you find in the normal UI in Windows 7. 2 tools. Scan state will drive the backup of things. Load state will restore it. And then we have a few optional utilities, but among most things, we have the templates, XML templates. These templates controls what data you bring across from the old installation to the new installation. Some customers, they migrate a lot. Many application settings, many document types, many settings for the operating system. Some customers migrate this much. They take the user favorites, they take the Outlook profile, and they take the ODBC connections. That's it. You can decide by modifying these templates what data you will bring over, and you can create and add new information to them by creating custom templates or by modifying them. So we can, in a very detailed way, determine exactly the stuff that we want to bring over. So let me show you a quite common scenario, replacing machines. Most of you do this every single year, or should be doing it every single year. Most companies, they replace about 20 to 25% of their machines every year. Old models going away, new machines coming in. So the scenario is, I have an old XP machine with stuff on it. I want to back up that stuff. And then I have a new machine with Windows 7. I want to restore that stuff. So let me jump over to my demo environment. Here we go. Here is my XP machine. So let me do this. On this machine, I have simply copied the USMT tools. From where? Exactly, from the Windows AIK download. So it's a mere 1.7 gig download of Windows IKE to get the 30 megs that USMT is, but that's how it is. So you need to download that ISO and extract it or install it, because when you do, you have a folder that looks like this after installing Wike. And this folder is the one, this folder right here is the one I copied to this XP box. Just an X copy over the network. So on my machine, I can now run ScanState. But first, let us review how my profile looks. So I will log in as Johan. And I will type the correct password. And as you can see, I have a massive profile here. I have a few documents on my desktop. And if I go into Internet Explorer, I have a favorite called My Site. That's it. That's my current configuration. So I will log out and log in as an admin, because you need to be an admin when doing the backup. Doesn't have to be a domain admin, but a local one. So, command prompt, into the folder, the right architecture. I will run ScanState. I will specify switches to configure what profiles I want to capture. By default, USMT will back up every single profile. And most often you don't want to do that. You want only to migrate a few of them. So I would add in user exclude first to say I don't want any profile, and then user include, in this case, to specify my profile only. And then I specify what templates I want to use. So in this case, I want to use the two built-in ones, MIG user and MIG app, samples that comes together with USMT. And again, if you have another template that will migrate additional settings, you simply specify that template as well on the command line. And then I need to specify a store somewhere. Where do I want this stuff? So I will put that on my deployment server in a folder, and I call this Johan 2. Ah, that would be fun. Thank you, guys. It's the beauty of doing live demos. What can possibly go wrong? I was doing a similar demo in Vegas, and I was putting my machines up on the bench and plugged everything in, and then I just adjusted my laptop a little bit, and I didn't notice that the power cord ejected until about 40 minutes into the session. Bam, black. And those 1.5 seconds it takes you to realize what happened. Up on stage, they are stressful. Sidebar, ScanState, specify the profiles, specify the templates, specifying somewhere to put the stuff. And as you can see, it's also now logging to a local log file. So it's now capturing the Johan profile as long as data that is outside that profile. So it's actually scanning the entire machine for known documents and known applications and things like that. So now, if I go to my server, if I go to my MIG data folder, I will obviously have a Johan2 folder. If I look in the content in this one, I have a single compressed file, USMT MIG. It's not very big, it's about 2 megs in size, but this can easily become quite big. Yes, sir. So the question is, can I copy the log files directly to the server share? Absolutely, you can do that. Can I use variables? Yes, you can do that. That's exactly what the deployment solutions are doing that I will demonstrate in about 5 to 10 minutes here. So absolutely yes. The most common question here is, what if I need to get some stuff from these files? Well, supportedly, you can only restore this content by actually running load state on machine and restoring it. But there are, if you are creative a bit and search the internet for USMT recovery, you will actually find some tools being created to pull content out of a store like this, basically unpack it as a zip file. So it's possible, it's just not that Microsoft doesn't provide you with those tools from the very beginning. On the other hand, I don't think it's that difficult to kick off a VM and just run load state to restore it. If I want, for testing purposes, verify that I get my data as it's supposed to be, I can run the scan state command with a sort of a no compress or uncompressed switch to it. So it will create an uncompressed store, and instead of a file, I will get the folded structure with everything in it. It will be about 10 times as big in terms of size, but still I can see all the content. So this could be useful for, testing, troubleshooting, things like that. So now I have a store on the server. I will go to my new Windows 7 machine, and I can actually remote into this. I'm not so sure who decided the resolution for these projectors to have a TechEd, because they are projecting in a resolution that Hyper-V cannot show. So I have to use remote desktop into them to get the full UI in the right full screen format.
Or use VMware.
I heard that comment, sir. He was suggesting an alternate platform for virtualization.
No, Hyper-V is the alternate platform.
All right. So while I'm waiting for that guy to connect, hello, my friend. Yeah, you are fine. Again, what could possibly go wrong? I do it like this. Fair enough. Control, Alt, Function, Break. Full screen. All right. Here is a Windows 7 box. If I look in the users folder, you can see there is no Johan profile on this machine. But when I bring a command prompt in front, I can navigate to my USMT folder here. That's my users folder. And run load state and simply specify the store. Johan something. I was clicking on tab and it's supposed to do a completion. There we go. Load state and the store. Simple as that. And now it will start to restore my profile and the information outside of it. Sorry, sir. The question was, did it grab more than one? I only had one because I only captured one.
Right.
Not more than one profile. The other one is the machine. So it will still say.
Multiple MIGs, would it grab all of them?
If there are multiple MIGs, will it grab all of them? No, it will only grab one, and it really needs to be named USMT.MIG. Yes, sir. In this case, to avoid some serious command lines, I decided to copy the binaries locally, but you can, by specifying UNC path all the way, of course, run them directly from the server. But then it's going to be every template, UNC. So that's why we use scripts later on to build the command line for us using variables. Will it work for multiple users on one computer? Yes. Yes, sir.
Can you specify specific files or folders and exclude others, or just the whole profile?
Can I exclude specific files and folders? Absolutely. I will show you how to do that when we come to customization. While we're waiting for the restore, let me just review some of the questions coming in on the Twitter feed. Let me see. A bunch of them, actually. All right. Is there a way to auto-join domain and migrate user settings to new domain profiles? Absolutely. You can use USMT to migrate between domains. These /MD and /MU switches allow you to specify a new domain. So it will actually migrate the settings to a brand new profile in the new domain, but only copy over the data that you specify. In contrast with using like ADMT and tools that just restamp the existing profile, this will actually create a new, clean, and pristine profile in the new domain and only copy the content over that you need. Can I do that in the same domain? Absolutely, you could. That's exactly what USMT does, because sometimes you have profiles, they've been around for a while, and they get big and sometimes corrupt. Yes, sir. So the question was, a gentleman in the audience has experienced that the need to run scan state or load state multiple times. No. Then something is wrong either with the templates or on the data, which is most likely, most times the case here. Scan state can't back up everything on this planet. If data is weird on the drive, it will freak out in some scenarios. But you will be able to see this in the log file, and you can troubleshoot it from there. Right. Let me see. Any good tools to edit USMT XML files? Absolutely. Notepad. I can stretch to XML Notepad that you can download from Microsoft. We are using PC Transplant for profile migration. It does not handle ODBC connections natively. Does USMT? Yes, it does. There is only an issue from 32 to 64-bit, which I unfortunately have no real solution for, and I know that was one of the questions popping up here earlier today as well. So if you need help with that, contact me offline, and I can see if we can work something out on that. But that's a sort of a thing that you want to be aware of. Normally, USMT can go fine from 32 to x64, not a problem. It will handle all things, it's just that ODBC connections has turned out to be a problematic issue. Can you go over an offline P-image machine? Can you do an offline capture? Yes, that's one of the new features in USMT4. Question about reliability with really large profiles. My record high is about 100 gig. That worked fine. I was working with a company in Stockholm a while. Their average was about 7 gig on every machine. That worked fine. So there are no real limitations, but it depends on the data that is putting into it. Will I be discussing the use of hard links? Yes, I will. Can load state capture that was not compressed be later restored? I have no idea, never tried. I can probably do and find out, but I don't know that one. So I will stop with those questions for now and go back to the demo here. So I restore the backup, and if I go to my C:users, I now have a profile here. And if I log out and log in as Johan this time, I'm supposed to have the documents back and my favorite in Internet Explorer in a week. This is a Microsoft moment. Normally I keep on bragging on how fast my machine is, but can't do that right now. Sorry? Do the profile does exist? No, USMT will actually create the profile. That's the beauty of it. It creates a blank profile and copies stuff to it that you have. So that's a cool thing. I have a question here. My company is convinced that USMT requires a lot of engineering, scripting, and is paying for a different product. Do you agree? No, I do not agree. Simple. Migrating from XP to Windows 7, can I migrate the quick launch shortcuts? Yes, you can, but not using USMT. I have to script that, because the way they are stored, you can't access that in a normal template. So I know that the deployment guys on their blog, they publish the VB script that allow you to do the quick launch configuration for the shortcuts. And with some creativity, you can probably restore that information from the existing machines. All right. Is there a fix for the ODBC issues? No, I'm sorry, I don't know of anyone. But please contact me. I have a Twitter alias here if you follow the feed. Apparently you do because you posted in it. And I will try to find out for you. Why can't USMT backup OSD files? Because the Office team doesn't support doing that. You need to create new ones on the new machines, period. PSD files, fine. What about not capturing profile that hasn't been logged on in 37 days? I will show how to do that. Can you avoid USMT captures failing because of a hidden partition? Problematic. You can certainly configure USMT to exclude certain drive letters if you can figure out that the drive letter of that utility drive. And now I'm getting to get a bit concerned why this is taking so long. Looks good. Power is on. Apparently. And I'm not using too much CPU either. And I haven't run out on disk. Let me do some weird thing here. It will probably be a bit upset, but the main controller is running. Appears to be happy. Time is right. comment, right? Fun part, I've been running these laptops for the entire week for all different sessions, and of course in the final one, they mess with me. Let me have that running for a while, and oh wait, here we go. Hey! You normally don't need to do a reboot to be able to log in, but in this case I had to. I think it could be related because I've been hibernating these guys, save, bring back, like 1,000 times, so that maybe freak it out. If I look in Internet Explorer, I'm supposed to have my site here. That's my migrated link. So it did migrate my settings. Now, in USMT, Microsoft added in support for hard links, which is really useful if you have refresh scenarios going on. Meaning you have an existing machine with XP, you want to deploy Windows 7 to it. So now when we do the backup, we actually don't copy anything. We're just creating links in the file system to the files and folders we want to keep. And we create that linked tree in a specific folder on the drive. Then we wipe the drive, except for that folder, apply the image, and then restore the links. And restoring links is like moving files within a volume. You know, when you move the files within a volume, it doesn't matter if you have like 10,000 files, it's still pretty quick because it doesn't really move the files. So now the backup will take about 3 minutes, no matter if you are migrating 3 gigs or 300. So that's the beauty. In the previous version, USMT 3, even if it was on the same drive, it actually copied everything to another folder and then copied it back. And that could take like an hour. And you also needed a space. Now I don't need a space. All right. As the question was in the feed here, we do support offline, so we can boot into WinP and run scan state from within WinP, which is pretty cool. Especially if we can't boot the machine into Windows, then it's really difficult to do the backup within Windows. Then it's easier to boot in a boot media and do it that way. Volume shadow copy support allows us to take snapshots of the files that are in use. And this was actually, in the previous version, one of the most common reasons it failed. Because imagine a user is running Outlook and they have a PSD file. So the PSD file is opened by Outlook. And you try to run a backup of that machine remotely. When it tried to back up the PSD file, it just aborted, broke, and stopped. Now, if USMT detects, if we flip that switch, a locked file, it will do a snapshot of it instead, using volume shadow copy services, which is nice. For the real hardcore security geeks in the room, you can know that we can now configure the level of encryption for our store, all the way up to AES 256 bits. That should be enough for most. We can configure any error handling in our templates, and we will come back to that later. We can use new helper functions. For example, say that a user has been using a machine for a while, and they have documents all over the place in folders that were not supposed to be documents at all, like Windows, and program files, everywhere on the drive. So we back up that and we restore it, and by default in USMT it will restore it to the same location, which is maybe not where we want to have them. I rather prefer to use one of the helper objects named move to rather move that data somewhere else. Data that is within the profile, it's easy to know. I know that the document in Johan's profile is supposed to be restored to Johan's profile, but data outside profiles, I don't know who it belongs to. So normally I move it to like a backup folder on the new machine. And then I tell the users that, all right, we are going to migrate your boxes. If you are missing something, don't call help desk. Check in this folder. It's probably here. Yes, sir. Does it preserve subdirectories? Yes, if you configure the templates to do so. It's just the setting that you do. Yes, sir, over there.
So if you tell it to exclude all except for specific users, it won't grab documents that go over to your folder and put them in that backup folder.
So the question was, if I exclude a profile, will it then scan other profiles folders and restoring content into the backup folder? It depends on how you configure the templates, but by default, no. Because you have different settings what to capture within the profile and different settings what to capture outside profiles. Yes, sir. A very good question. What if you're using third-party encryption? Well, I can tell you from a refresh scenario, you're toast. You have to treat that machine as a replace, meaning run the backup on the running OS where the hard drive is sort of open, unlocked. And then we do a bare metal deployment and restore the backup, but on the same machine. So that's how we deal with it. All right. USMT can also migrate, of course, local groups and things, and we can also, by using different switches and utilities, we can find out exactly what files are going to be migrated without doing a migration. It can be helpful when it's testing. So, what are the settings that USMT does migrate? Well, most things that you can do in Internet Explorer. Most email settings, Outlook, Outlook Express, data, PSD files, PAB files, web files, address books, things like that. Most things that you can do in the control panel is being migrated. And then USMT also scans all local fixed disks for known extensions and bring that over as well. USMT version 4 supports backing up XP and above to Vista and above. If you still need to support XP to XP, you actually have to use USMT version 3 to do that. You can go from 32 to 64, but not the other way around. So you can have a 32-bit XP going to 64-bit Windows 7, which is of course cool. Now, I talked about the profiles. So in this example, I'm showing some links or some switches to limit the number of profiles. And one of the questions I got in the feed, how can I make sure that the only profiles being logged on the past 37 days, that will be the mid switch that says 90 now. By using /UL, I will limit it to only backup profiles being logged on, in this case for 3 months. Because it's like this, when you have a machine that's been around for like 4 years, it may have 20 profiles on that box, whereof 17 are obsolete long time ago. So by using this switch, we can make sure not to cover too much junk. I can also configure it to only migrate certain users, certain domains, and I can also use the MDs and MU switches to actually migrate between different domains as well.
Does it have any logic capability where you could say if a profile hasn't been logged into in 3 months, don't migrate that one?
So the question was, does it have any logic to migrate profiles not being logged on for the past 3?
Can you gate users rather than specifying by name, specify by age of last login?
Sorry. I need this guy does exactly that. So if that's what you want, this is the switch. All right. What I normally do, and I can show it here, I can do some magic in right, probably. I prefer to use either this switch and a fixed number of days, say 37, or I will exclude every single user like this, and then maybe include only my domain users, depending on environment. The problem is now, I would like to have all three. Sorry, you can't. Pick two, can't have them all. So how do we solve this? Well, just before I back up stuff, or just because I back up things, it doesn't mean I have to restore them. And normally this line will give me the smallest backup store, but then when I'm restoring it, I only restored my domain users. Because one of the questions in the feed was, all right, how can I avoid copying local users? I'm not interested in them. This is how. Another way is, of course, get rid of the junk before. Normally in the deployment solutions, we'll have a sequence calling scan state. We can add a command before that if you have an XP machine, run the delprof utility from Resource Kit to delete the profiles. We're going to wipe the machine anyway. So we have a VB script deleting all the old profiles. Now I can skip this and only grab whatever domain profiles that are left on the machine. If you're lucky enough to have Vista, maybe not so lucky, but if you do, Vista or Windows 7, there is actually a group policy that you can set that will automatically delete profiles, cached profiles older than a fixed number of days. So that's another option for you. Get rid of the junk before doing the backup, or backing up more than you're actually restoring. So that's the second option here. Right. So what about refresh scenarios? Well, this is something that we want to automate, and this is something we don't want to do manually, because that would involve us writing a bunch of scripts to first store the backup not on the server, but rather somewhere else on my drive. And then I will write a script that will apply my image and exclude that folder and then restore the backup. And then I would have to sort of run the load state command to do that. What I recommend you guys to do is take a peek into these guys. Basically, any of the solution offerings that Microsoft has on deployment tools. The first one is totally free, doesn't cost you anything. The other one is based on Config Manager 2007. Both are using components from MDT, but one is standalone without management, and one is with management. And I often get the questions, oh, all right, which one should we use? That's simple, in my opinion. If you have Config Manager in place, and it's working, it's not the exact same thing, use it. It's really powerful. And you extend it by adding the MDT components to it to get like 100+ more features, and especially around user state migration. If you don't have Config Manager, use Light Touch. Powerful. So, how do they integrate with USMT? Well, first of all, let me pull up the Light Touch environment and then pull up the Config Manager environment. So this is Light Touch. How many? Oh, thanks. This is Light Touch. How many of you in here are using it? 30% maybe. How many of you are using Config Manager? The rest of the room. All right. With Light Touch, we create deployment shares. We add our applications, operating systems, drivers, and everything related to normal OS deployment. But in the sequences that we create, the default sequences, they actually have ready-made steps to do state capture for different scenarios. So this is a cool file. Does anyone know what this actually does? Sorry? It generates the application migration file. Yeah, that's a very good guess. That script will look at all installed applications on the machine you're trying to back up. And if they have an association, like file extensions linked to them, it will generate a template that will do a backup of those files. Meaning, if the source machine has Acrobat Reader installed, PDF files is linked to it, now it will generate a template, an XML template, to migrate PDF files. So if you're trying to figure out why MBT suddenly is migrating more stuff than when you run the commands manually, this is why. If you don't like it, disable it. Then we have an action here, capturing user state. This is a VB script running scan state. And what we do in MBT Light Touch is we configure the settings as command line properties here in the rules file. So if I want to specify additional arguments, I simply do that here. Because MDT will hand out everything else. So the sequence will now take care of a refresh. And later, of course, in the sequence, it will do a restore of the data. Here, restore user state. This is a VB script running load state. So to refresh your machine, what you need to do, start the script, the Light Touch script on the running OS, go down to Starbucks for like an hour, and then come back because the machine is ready. Yes, sir?
Is there error handling into scan states as it runs into these sheets to stop the entire task?
The question was, what about the error handling? Will it stop if an error occurs? It's a little bit depending on what type of error it is. There is a /C switch that you can add, which is added by default, that really will cause it to continue. But if it aborts because of a sort of like a real error, like scan state failed to do something miserably, it will actually abort. Because we don't want the sequence to continue to wipe the drive unless we were sure we got the backup. And if you want to, you can add in additional safeguards if needed, if you think that's sort of important to have. But now the entire process is automated. So we have a sequence driving this rather than running like I did, scan state and load state on every machine. In Config Manager, same thing. We have a sequence. It will capture user state. Later, it will restore user state. The difference is now, if we are doing replaces, we can take advantage of the state migration point in Config Manager that allows us to have more secure ways of dealing with replay scenarios. Because Config Manager will now assign a password unique for every single backup it takes. And by using the Config Manager database and the association, I can easily create a link between the old and new machine. So that when I deploy my new machine, it will know what backup to restore. By default in Light Touch, we'll have the prompt for it. Yes, sir? I did not hear that. All right, I get the question. So what if I have virtual applications? Will ScanState back up the virtual application settings? In general, not. The AppV applications will have its own way of dealing with user state information. ScanState is simply a tool that will look at the local drive, local registry for information. That's it. So if the data is there, we can migrate it. If it's not, we really can't. All right. So, what about customizing the stuff that we bring across? To do that, you need to create these XML files. And to know that, you need to learn the terms. When you read the documentation, which they, by the way, conveniently forgot to add to the start menu, but it's in there, migration files, it's simply the default ones. Custom ones is something that you create. Config files, it's something that works in Light Touch but doesn't work in Config Manager. Config files is a simple file saying yes and no to components that you want to migrate. In Config Manager, we have to create the templates. So, what do you think this guy, this template, will migrate? Educated guess here. Yes, sir.
File 1 from demo 1, and then everything in demo 2.
Exactly.
And also,
This file here, file name text, or this line here, because we have an include section, meaning backup. We could have an exclude section, meaning don't backup. And when they are conflicting, it's always the most specific setting that will win. So the first line will migrate all files named filename.txt exactly. That is in the demo1 folder, or as the star indicates, any of its subfolders. If I remove that star, it has to be directly in demo1. And as the gentleman said, the second line will migrate the entire demo2 folder. So if you see an example like this, how difficult is it to change it to migrate another file or another folder? Probably not that difficult. The problems are more when we need to figure out what settings and data we want. Files are quite easy because normally the help desk department have sort of a clue what they normally bring across when they are replacing machines. It's just that in the past they may have had like a checklist what to do when replacing machines. Now we can create templates for that instead of having that checklist. Because you and I know that if you have a checklist 10 pages long being executed 100 times, will it be identical every single time? Probably not. When you have a template that does the migration, it will do it exactly the same every single time. Hopefully successful, but you get the point. The problem starts with applications. Where do you start? How do you know even what applications to migrate settings for? In my opinion, dead simple. If you give a user a new machine and you have to do something on that machine, or help desk have to remote into that machine and do something for their application A to work. Now you have a candidate to create a template for. I was working with a truck manufacturing company. They had about 1,200 apps in total. How many of them do you think needed a USMT template? 1,201. No, 200. The rest of the applications could even be solved by being packaged correctly. They had their like central settings and things like that. So of these 1,200, 200 needed templates. Whose responsibility is it to create those templates? Should be the app owner, but in real world it's actually the application packager. The app owner may take the decision, but the person actually creating the template is normally the application packager. So this company, if an application needed a small template, and some apps needed a template with like one line, one registry key, one application had more complex templates. So every application packager created that small template for their specific app. And then it simply had a VB script that just merged them together into a larger template, and then they simply added that to the deployment process. So imagine this. Imagine you call application A support, and you ask them for a USMT template. Do they have one? Probably not. Do they know what USMT is? Probably not. So when you ask them later, the second question is, all right, never mind. Can you just give me a list, sir or ma'am, on all the files, all the folders, and all the registry keys, all the ini files that your application needs to be, migrated over successfully? Most times they don't have a clue. If you're lucky, they do, but most times they don't. So these are the type of call that normally ends up with they wishing you having a nice day and you wishing them something else back. Point is, you often need to figure out things yourself. And your best friend to do this is Process Monitor from sysinternals, also known as Microsoft these days. So I will switch over to my all-time favorite demo, Notepad. I love Notepad. As you have probably seen, when you do things in Notepad, like typing, and later, I didn't select it, but do something really not that bright. Select Wingdings as the font. The next time you open Notepad, still Wingdings. So apparently Notepad is storing settings somewhere. Problem is, I don't know where. So now Notepad is our line of business application. So what we can do is I can start Process Monitor, and it's a free download, of course. And when I start it, I can set a filter on processes. In this case, I set a filter to only monitor Notepad things. And now when I start this monitoring, Process Monitor will do on an extremely detailed level, log everything that Notepad does in my file system and in my registry. So now I will kick off Notepad. We'll type 4 bytes in here, and I will change the font back to Times New Roman. And then I will close Notepad because I have learned Notepad is storing the settings when I save it. And I will now stop the trace. And as you can see down here, it took about about 5,000 I/O operations in Windows to change the font in Notepad. But now I can start to see what Notepad did. So for example, I can start search for times, and I can see that Notepad actually tried to open the times file. It says create file, but it really means open. It's the API call. And as you can see, it does that a few times to, make sure. And then it loads times italic. I can see down here. All right. It loads times bold. Times bold italic. Times again, just to be sure. I can see it's reading different registry keys. I'm not very interested in that, but I can see it does that. It could be, for example, an application requires a font that is non-present in Windows. By logging this, you would see the application reading that font, and you would know, all right, I might add a line to my template to migrate this specific font for this specific application. I continue my search. Now it's interesting, because now I can see that Notepad actually wrote something into my registry, reg set value. And if I hover over the data, the details, I can actually see that the data being written was Times New Roman. And I can have Process Monitor hypnotize the registry for me and simply take me to that location. This is where Notepad stores its setting. I probably should have known, right? Current user software, Microsoft Notepad, all right. But your application would probably not be that easy to find. So now I know the registry key. Let's go ahead and create a template. So let's dive into the help files. Windows IE, documentation, they are not here. But we can go and open that folder, of course. Let's see. Not that one. Windows IE docs, shums. Here you will find USMT.chum, the USMT help file. If I open that file, go to Reference, Custom Samples, Migrating Files and Registry Keys, Example 3. Beautiful. This is a template that will migrate this template here. That will migrate registry keys. How difficult is it to create a template that will migrate your application key? Copy, paste, change. So the problems are more related to finding out what stuff we need, because building the templates are quite easy. And there are so many examples that you can look at and use, even in the default user samples. Let me show you another sample from basically the same folder here. Let me show you the default MIG user template. Go to the bottom here. What do you think this line do in that template? Anyone? Exactly. Simple as that. We'll migrate all QDF files, and it will scan all local fixed disks to find them. How difficult would it be to create a template that will also migrate PDF files from the local drives? Copy and paste and change QDF to PDF. So imagine now you create this really fancy template that copies exactly the files and folders that you want. How do you make sure that your deployment solutions actually use them? Starting with light touch. We need to copy them somewhere. So I will open up my deployment share. If you look at these folders, could there be somewhere in here where it would make sense to store USMT templates? Yes, sir.
USMT folder.
The USMT folder, how about that? You simply copy them here. Put them in this location. Then you will go into your settings and configure them. USMT MIG files. 001. You normally start by using the default ones. There should be a dot in here. You can only have 1,000. Don't do that. And then your custom one. Copy them to the folder, specify them in here, and they will be used. Yes, sir.
Is it okay to edit the default folder?
The question is, can I change the default ones? Yes, you can. Do I recommend it? Generally, no, unless you want to exclude something in there. Otherwise, I normally create a custom one for all my additional components. And if you want to exclude, don't delete, just comment out in the files. So this was light touch. This is what you need to do. For config manager, you need to copy the files where? Exactly, the USMT package that you have. Put them in there. And then you need to configure config manager to use them. That will be in your settings package. Like this. A little bit different, but still. In light touch, I added them like one per line. Here, different files are comma separated. But that's how you do it in config manager. And for this to work in config manager, this value has to be set. This value is the equivalence of going into a sequence and check this one. Whoops. This one in the middle. So if I only want to do this change for a specific sequence, I will do it in here. If I won't be able to customize every sequence, I will do it in here. So it's really up to you guys. Light touch by default will support it. Config manager is a little bit different. And you also need to add the properties up here. You can see there are, I don't know who came up with the names, but they're like really long. So what can we do when things go wrong? Well, luckily, both when we are using light touch and when we are using config manager, the default actions will actually generate a bunch of log files that you can dive into and review. So they are not only using the normal scan state and load state logs, they are also adding in progress logs, which can give you additional information about why things go wrong. The main log file for light touch is actually the bdd.log file, which will have all the logs in it. In config manager, it's the normal sequence log file, the SMSTS log file. What's the problem with that log file? It's ugly. I wouldn't say ugly. If you open it in Notepad, it's ugly. If you open it in Trace32, it's nice. It's being truncated. So you may have to dive into the archive copy to get, the right settings. So that's something you should know about. Right. Do you know how we can increase the size of the log file? Because it's 1 meg by default. And it will only create 1 copy, so meaning 2 megs. What happens if our sequence is more complex and it's growing beyond 2 megs? Well, we'll miss the first part of it. So if we have an issue early in like a state capture, and we do the deployment full time through, and we try to review the log files, we'll be missing stuff in the beginning. Fair enough when you start deployment in Windows, but what if you start things in WinP? For example, when using UDI and Config Manager, we do offline capture, so we start in WinP when we do the capture. How can we increase the log file in WinP? According to the Config Manager team, it can't be done, at least per the documentation. Of course it can. If you take a Config Manager boot image, which I happen to have here, thank you. Crank open it. There is a Vim file in here. I can mount this guy. Let me just verify I don't have anything mounted. That's okay. So I can use image X to mount that file. Mounted. In the Windows folder, I can create a file called this, smsts.ini. In that file, I can specify the log file size. And as you can see, I've cranked it up to 10 megs rather than 1 meg. And I have not yet seen a sequence generating more than like 5 megs, so I figured that 10 would be a safe value to set. Now I'm making sure that I always have all the information in the log file so I don't miss anything when I troubleshoot. All right. You don't need to do this with light touch. All right. Some questions coming in. Let me answer those. Is there a way to back up data ahead of time then USMT just... Now, we can't do deltas. That was really the question. Can we do deltas? No, we cannot. Can you load a saved profile to the default profile? Not with USMT, you cannot, but it will capture machine information that could be related to that. There is a really good blog on the deployment guys site that will deal with copying things to the default user profile. So that should be good. Can you run USMT remotely? Absolutely. Config Manager, dead easy. Push an advertisement. Light touch, use PSExec to drive the light touch installation remotely. Best way to work around the MSX patch that broke the ability to connect stay. All right. I think the question is really about patch causing one of the steps in the config manager sequence to break because the certificate problem, and it's basically the friendly name in that certificate causing the problem. They did release a hotfix, but it's just going in and change that friendly name of the certificate to something else, and the problem goes away. Or uninstall the hotfix. That works too. So either way. Is it possible to do a refresh with BitLocker and suspend? I'm I'm not so sure about the suspend thing, but we can certainly do a refresh with normal BitLocker on the machine. MDT Light Touch and Config Manager supports it. It's the only disk encryption that we actually can do a refresh with, at least being supported from Microsoft, that is. Does it back up and restore wallpaper? Sort of. As long as it's a custom wallpaper, it can't migrate the built-in ones because it was apparently a copyright issue. Microsoft did only license the images for XP, so they are not allowed to restore them to Windows 7. So as long as it's a custom wallpaper, yes. Does it migrate screensaver? No. Power settings? No. Can you run ScanState when I boot from Pixie? Yes, you can. That's called offline backup. It's being available using UDI and Config Manager today. It will be available tomorrow, I would love to say, but in the next release of MDT 2012, they are adding in offline backup. If you can't wait, there are plenty of articles on the web that show you how to configure MDT 2010 to do offline capture within WinPE as part of the sequence. So now you can do a refresh of a machine by hitting F12. You don't have to start it on the running OS. Pretty cool. How much does antivirus slow USMT? Not that much, but if it is a problem for you, disable it before running backup. But problem is now, you sort of want to make sure you don't get junk stuff into the backup. So hopefully it should be clean, but I haven't seen antivirus causing that much of a problem for that. Does USMT capture local group membership? Yes, it does by default. You can use the switches to avoid it. If it's a member is if a user is a member of an admin group, does that copy it over? We can certainly use USMT to capture group information, but even better, both in Config Manager and in Light Touch, we can specify what people we would like to have in the local admin groups from the machines or in the new machines that we deploy. So that was the current Twitter feed, and we have a whopping 2 minutes for more questions. So, more questions. Yes, sir, in the back.
Just wanted to confirm something that I think you said earlier in response to Tom's question up there.
You go to the mic.
I repeat it.
Okay. He asked about the AppV applications, the user settings within those. He said it would not transfer those. So basically, if you're using AppV to deploy an application, the user settings within the application, there's no way to transfer those.
So the follow-up question was basically, how can I deal with AppV user state information that's belonging to that particular virtual bubble? I haven't seen any solutions using USMT to capture information in that bubble. So I will have to follow up on that one, sir. I don't have the answer on top of my head. So contact me on Twitter or send an email or whatever, and I'll try to follow up. Yes, sir. What about files associated? Well, if it can find the info in the local machine in the registry, yes, you can. If it doesn't, you can't. All right, I think we have time for one more question. All right, I'll be up here if you have any more questions. Hope you had a great TechEd. I had. It's been a pleasure being here. Thank you for taking your time. Please fill in the evals, and thank you.